Podcast. Eddie Lacy, Mike Daniels, Gilbert Brown, Don Barclay, Micah Hyde, your Green Bay Packers, yesterday's legends and today's superstars. From corporate or non-profit events to private parties, add some spice, hire a Packers player from Mayfield Sports Marketing. For details, just go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances.
Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Cards.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Pulse of the Pack. It is Sunday afternoon. Kind of a strange time for us to be doing the show, but it is a weird scheduled week. The Green Bay Packers played on Thursday, Thanksgiving night, I'm sure you heard, and they play again this Thursday against the Detroit Lions. I'm Jacob Westendorf, joined as always by Jason Perrone. I'm doing well here in Rockford. It's cold. We had a 50-degree day on Friday and a 30-degree day on Saturday. It was kind of weird, but that's the Midwest for you, I suppose. Jason, not much weather variation out there, I imagine. How are you doing?
Oh, but there is, Jacob. It's just as cold out here in Arizona Packerland as it is back there, both proverbially and to us Arizonans. We'll be lucky to top 60 degrees today, so that is actually cold for us. Man, I gotta say,
for you.
I know. I know. I do this to you every week, but you know what? I will tease. I'm going to tease a little bit here. And Jacob, you're probably not even aware of this either. I'm going to tease this a little bit, though. I think there's a possibility that my opening comments about the weather may be very short-lived. So I'll leave it at that. But I have to say, you know what? Listening to our intro every week, you know, obviously we all remember the Cobb touchdown, week 17, 2013 when Rodgers came back. But, man, listening to that highlight of that Devontae Adams touchdown against the Cowboys in the playoffs last year, it has been so long since we have seen anything like that from number 17.
Well, oddly enough, to go with your tease, that's the last time Devontae Adams has been in the end zone. But we're going to start the show with a little bit of a positive feel. The game did not go well. We'll get to that. But the first thing I want to start with is obviously I told a couple of my friends, I was done working the game at halftime. So I drove home that night because the weather was garbage and I had some stuff to do on Friday morning with my middle school basketball boys. We had to be up and at 'em by about 8 o'clock the next morning, and I live 3 hours away from Green Bay. So my buddy that was working the game with me decided we would leave at half, listen to the game on the radio on the way home. I've watched the game since. Believe me, it was frustrating as all hell. The Packers are obviously going to remember now that they lost that game. But the grand scheme of things is that night was about Brett Favre, Bart Starr, and Aaron Rodgers. So what I want to do, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we kind of did that last week with our tribute to number 4. But I was in the stadium, and I got to tell you, it was an awesome day for me. I can't share a whole lot with you as far as my experiences. If you guys ever want to chat with me one-on-one, I can now. But over the air, I can't say as much. But I got to shake hands with Brett Favre on Thursday night. And as someone that has been idolizing him since I was 4, it's an experience I'll never forget. And the rest of it, the halftime ceremony was phenomenal. The whole thing was just, I got goosebumps thinking about it right now. When they pulled Bart Starr out, watching Favre hug him, hold him, it kind of looked like a son taking care of his old father. And I was blown away by it. And then for those of you guys that remember, Rodgers, I don't know if they showed this on a broadcast or not, but Rodgers came out of the tunnel last out of halftime, and him and Brett stopped, and they did the old put her in the old Vice celebration they used to do back when Favre was a starting quarterback, and that was very cool. It's a lasting impression. You know, Mark Murphy introduced him, the unveiling of the number 4. It was great. Emotions were high. I can't say enough about it. I loved everything about that ceremony. It's something I'll never forget. And fortunately, a few years from now, I probably won't even remember that the Packers lost that night, but I will remember that ceremony. Those are memories I'll never forget. So, Jason, briefly, what were your impressions from a distance on the ceremony? What were the emotions like, all those kinds of things?
Well, it was a little different for me because earlier this year, I lost my dad after a battle with pancreatic cancer, and I know that Bart Starr is kind of battling cancer right now as well. He's undergone the stem cell treatments, and so to see him out there in that kind of weather and knowing that, you know, his mind is challenged and his body is challenged, and, you know, again, that the conditions were not ideal for somebody in, you know, in his state of health, that was really what stood out to me. It was very, very courageous, and so much so that, I mean, regardless of all those other factors, you know, Bart Starr shows up in Lambeau Field, he should get a game ball, but he got a game ball in my game balls and lame calls column because no more courageous thing has happened at Lambeau Field and as long as I can remember, and that was the part that I loved the most about the evening, even though it was about Favre and having his name put up in the ring, and justifiably so. And I'm glad that it was, and it was nice to see him actually wearing Packers colors again. That was really what stood out to me. Unfortunately, Jacob, unlike yourself, I will have fond memories of that moment always. But I will also remember what happened in the game. You know, those are not the types of things I easily forget. So it's unfortunate that the Packers couldn't win this game and really get up for so many reasons that they had to get up for. But what a great moment, and happy for you to some of the things that you got to experience there. I mean, that's pretty special. I mean, we are not journalists not to be, you know, waving the same flag and hopping on that train that has been so popular over the past couple of weeks with some of the issues that have been had between the bloggers and journalists, you know. So, you know, we're really fans more than anything, and for you to get to experience all that stuff is so awesome and so cool, and I would cherish it as well. Probably a great thing that you left at the half, but we got to talk about this game at some point, so we might as well dive into her.
And that's what we're going to do right now is dive into the game. The Packers lost 17-13 to the Chicago Bears. The defense was brilliant early on and really good throughout most of the game. A couple drives here or there that kind of, you know, frustrate you. The Bears going 80-plus yards to score a touchdown. That leaves a sour taste in your mouth. But really, the Bears didn't do anything until an Eddie Lacy fumble basically gift-wrapped them 7 points. So I want to start on the defense. One thing that they did have was Quentin Rollins was playing in place basically of Micah Hyde, and I thought he played very well from what I could see, what I saw afterward. You know, the first question, I guess, is this guy's a second-round pick. Whenever he's been given opportunities, he's just made plays. Is it time for him to get more time? And I think it is. Whether that's over Micah Hyde, whether that's over Casey Hayward, it's definitely over Demetri Goodson, in my opinion. The Packers used a lot of Demetri Goodson against the Carolina Panthers, for example. Rollins was injured in that game, of course, but that was a little different. So, but I think it's time for this guy to start getting a little more time on the field. Maybe he needs to be the new tight end guy. You know, the Packers have talked about how, you know, Micah Hyde's their tight end guy, but he kind of struggled with Owen Daniels. He struggled with Kyle Rudolph. Greg Olsen lit the Packers up. I think that Rollins needs to play more. He's very athletic. He's good around the ball. And the Packers just need to get this kid some more reps, get him ready for down the stretch of this year and, you know, going into next year as well. The Packers just need to give their second-round pick more opportunities, in my opinion. That's where I want to start, Jason, is, you know, we're going to talk about some replacements on defense. This is one of them. Is this one that needs to be made?
Yeah, Rollins had the only sack of the night on Jay Cutler. and we talked a couple days ago earlier, about this whole thing. Quentin Rollins, the thing I like about him is that he just plays the game. He just plays football. He doesn't care what the situation is, who's playing, what the gravity of the scenario is, what's at stake. He doesn't care how many times or how many games the Packers have gone without a sack. He just makes plays. And I think this team gets befuddled by its own overthinking and mentality. Quentin Rollins just completely defies some of those issues, and it's a very refreshing thing to see. So if he's healthy, and I said, fortunately he avoided a big neck injury a couple weeks ago, very fortunate. Yeah, see, he does deserve to be on the field. He should be on the field. I mean, right now, frankly, he's the third best cornerback on this team. I don't think that's crazy of me to say. You've got Sam Shields, Demarius Randall, and Quentin Rollins, and then you got Casey Hayward, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, yeah, but will he is the question. And I know we're going to talk about some of the other position groups, hopefully one of which is an inside linebacker, because that's my biggest bone to pick. This team and this coaching staff just has this system that they love to live and die by, whereby it's really tough for players to get on the field regularly for some reason, even if they're being productive. And I hope that, one good thing comes from this unfortunate last 5 games, where they've only won once. It's that this team realizes that, hey, we got to play the guys that are actually making plays. I mean, Mike McCarthy talks about the hot hand when he talks about his running backs and Eddie Lacy and James Starks. Put your money where your mouth is. That needs to take place at every position group. So Quentin Rollins all day. 2 interceptions against the Rams. Came up with one. Was it against the Lions?
No,
did he have
against
one?
The Lions. No, he just had 2 in here. He had the one that was returned for a touchdown.
But he's a gamer, and that's what this team needs. They need some gamers. It doesn't matter whether they had the perfect week of practice. I mean, he makes plays. These other guys, Jake Ryan, makes plays. Get them on the field.
Well, and one thing, obviously, if you guys have followed the show, I've mentioned several times, I loved Quentin Rollins. One thing I liked about him and Randall both is they're always around the ball, or so it seems. Rollins just has that uncanny knack to make a play when he's on the field. And it's something you really can't coach a whole lot. I mean, and I'm not comparing the 2 players, so please don't think that I am in this case. But, I always looked around, and I've watched some old games recently. I've watched, obviously, Charles Woodson's entire career. And one thing about Woodson that I've always just marveled at with him is he's always around the ball. And that doesn't mean that Quentin Rollins is going to be Charles Woodson. Charles Woodson is inserting himself in the conversation of greatest defensive back ever. And that's not just coming from me. That's coming from a lot of other people much smarter than I am. So I think that the Packers need to get more players on the field like that, because they only have 11 interceptions this season. That's not as many as you'd hope for, especially with Don Capers' defense. Kind of not 100% reliant on turnovers, but they need to get some more turnovers than what they've been getting. One other replacement, and this is one that we've been kind of banging the drum for the last couple of weeks, is Nate Palmer. And believe me, Nate Palmer's better than what the Packers have had the last couple of years. But the last couple of years, we're talking about Brad Jones and A.J. Hawk. That's not saying a whole lot. Jake Ryan, Jake Ryan comes in and plays against the Carolina Panthers, and he plays in limited fashion and leads the team in tackles. Now, tackles isn't the most important statistic when it comes to players. However, basically the Packers kind of downplayed his performance after the game, and, they're coaches. They see coaches' film. They see all these different things, so they're probably smarter than we are in terms of this and how things go. But Palmer doesn't make a lot of big plays, and he's not exactly assignment sure. On the Zach Miller touchdown after the Eddie Lacy fumble, the Packers, you could see Clay Matthews kind of frantically motioning at Palmer to do something, and Miller kind of cut the middle between Matthews and Nate Palmer there. I would imagine that was Nate Palmer's assignment then, based on the reaction to Matthews during that and after the game. So I guess my question is, why is this guy still in the starting lineup? Why are they so anti putting Jake Ryan in the game? Because at this point, you don't have a whole lot to lose. I mean, Nate Palmer's not making big plays. And Jake Ryan didn't do anything to suggest to you that he can't play, to suggest to you that he's going to be in the wrong position, to suggest to you that he's going to give up those big gash plays because he just doesn't know what he's doing. I also think it's Jake Ryan time at inside linebacker. Jason, are you in with me on that as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was one of my predictions way back in the summer, or when they first drafted Jake Ryan, about his contribution to this team. I predicted he was going to be an important one, and turns out that could be true. I mean, he might get in there and stink up the joint, and then we're all wishing that we never let Nate Palmer leave the field, but I think we at least need to find out. I mean, how long, like you said, the Packers don't have as much to lose by putting him out there. I mean, how many more games do they want to lose before they throw Jake Ryan out there? And then what if he plays stellar during the next last couple games, and they could have had that in there this whole time, and it might have made a difference? So this is what I'm talking about when I say this coaching staff, just the stubbornness, the reluctance to make adjustments and changes, and you got to spark your team somehow. And the defense is not really the biggest issue going on, but there's a weakness there, and there's a pattern there that feeds into the overall aura of this team, which is that they're not playing up to their potential. And so when you've got guys on either side of the ball that are not playing well or aren't able to play well, I mean, you said Nate Palmer isn't very assignment sure. I'm not so convinced that isn't as much a product of the fact that he just is like clumpy and slow rather than doesn't know where to go. I mean, he might know where to go, but he can't get there. That's another issue is that he just, he's real good at jawing at offensive players after a play when he's the third guy there on top of the pile who's, the joke used to be, I think Bill Johnson loved to say this on Green and Gold today, that Jamal Reynolds, when he was with the Packers, was the greeter because he was always there to greet the guy that made the tackle because he was always there so late the play was over. And I think that might be what's happening with Nate Palmer. He's real good at that, but I mean, come on, give me Jake Ryan because I liked what I saw in the flash, the little bit that we against the Carolina Panthers, who are a good team. So let's get over ourselves here, Mike McCarthy, because you're the head coach. So you need to tell Dom Capers, hey, we're going to make a change this week because you need to step up and take the reins on this team. This team takes on the personality of its coach. I'm getting off topic now. And somebody needs to step up and make this change here because it's Jake Ryan time because he's not going to be Desmond Bishop. So let's get that out there right now. Let's squash the whole 2010. Nick Barnett gets hurt. Desmond Bishop comes in, lights up the world, and the Packers go on to glory. I'm not saying that, but I think you're right, Jacob. Jake Ryan can't be anything worse than what's already out there at inside linebacker. Another thing I'd like to say about inside linebacker is I think Clay Matthews needs to stay on the inside until this team can win consistently and get themselves back together because in the middle without him there's just too much opportunity for opposing offenses.
And I would agree with that as well. You mentioned how the defense isn't the main unit that is struggling and is a problem, and that would be correct because that unit is the offense that is led by Aaron Rodgers, who by many coming into the season accounts was the best quarterback in football. And Aaron Rodgers isn't playing like the best quarterback in football, and we've had this conversation on the show before. One thing that stuck out on Thursday night was the fact that Devontae Adams and James Jones both had nights to forget. James Jones had a drop in the end zone that would have won the game. Devontae Adams had a drop early that would have been a touchdown. The field just opened like a Red Sea. Rodgers rolled right, hit him right in the hands. Devontae didn't catch the ball. He would have scored a touchdown. One thing that I do think is becoming more prevalent, and let me get this out there in front. Davante Adams hasn't played well. For a guy that was hyped up in the offseason to be a star, who's the offense's MVP according to the offseason work, according to Mike McCarthy, Adams hasn't played well. But what's happening is, and I think this happens in a lot of fan bases, what you see is when a team struggles, it's almost as if one player wasn't there or was replaced by his backup, things would immediately be better. I call those guys the scapegoats of the team. For example, in recent years, you're talking about Brad Jones, A.J. Hawk, Tramon Williams. In Chicago, for example, they would talk about Shane McClellan. Guys like that, players that we blame them consistently, and it's almost as if without those guys, everything would be okay. So if Davante Adams, for example, was replaced by Jeff Janis, then Davante Adams would no longer contribute, and Jeff Janis would make this offense at least look somewhat competent and back to the high-flying, high-octane offense that we're used to in the past. Now, for those of you that follow our godfather here at She Said TV, that's Aaron Nagler, he showed you a couple routes from the game film that he was watching, and he just called it a lazy route. And Janis, for all the measurables he has, and believe me, with the ball in his hands, he looks good. His kick returns the last couple of weeks have been dynamic. When he catches a crossing route in the preseason or something like that, he scores. He looks good with the ball in his hands. But the problem is, it's the small things that the Packers will do to put guys on the field. Jeff Janis isn't getting on the field because he doesn't run his routes well. He misses blocks. And mentally, apparently, still not quite up to speed with the offense. And that's a big jump for him going from Saginaw Valley State to Green Bay Packers offense. And I understand that. Davante Adams, however, I don't want to let him off the hook so easy because, listen, son, if they're going to call you a star all offseason, you've got to do something. And it's not like – it just seems as if throughout games, Davante Adams is too busy begging for flags and such instead of just making plays. And I'll give you a little hint here. That whole story that Cam Newton and Ed Hockley had of how player X isn't old enough to get that call, whether or not that's true, whether or not that exchange actually happened, there are some things you can see. If a player has a pedigree in the NFL, they get calls that a player who doesn't have as much of a pedigree doesn't get. Adams is a young receiver. He's caught like 70 passes or something in his career, something like that. He hasn't been in the end zone since our intro. That means the Dallas game last year in the playoffs. He just hasn't played that well. So the first thing, I guess, to say all that, the question I have for you, Jason, is, one, are you okay with scapegoating Davante Adams? Or are there much larger issues at hand? And two, if you are going to replace Adams in the lineup, who's it with?
I don't like scapegoating any one player because there are a few sports where the reliance on everybody on the field is heavy, fewer sports than football. So for that reason, no, I don't like scapegoating Davante Adams. I mean, he missed some games with an ankle injury, and they were still winning without him. The offense, believe it or not, this offense actually is better when he's on the field. He's going through a major sophomore slump right now, and these types of things are what young players have to fight through. It's all a part of the learning process of them coming into the NFL is that, you had some success last year. As a matter of fact, it was this Sunday last year, we were at Lambeau Field right about this time when the Packers were playing the Patriots, and this was the game, so it's almost 1 year to the day. Davante Adams had his coming out party against the Patriots and played well for the rest of the season. And maybe, all of the accolades that Rodgers and coaching staff threw at Adams during the preseason really maybe didn't do him a favor because maybe it led him to believe that he was in better shape than he was and that maybe he just needed to show up and that he didn't need to work so hard. And, he had the ankle injury, and so he's had to learn how to come back from injury, how to work hard, how to get back to that level, how to realize that, if you're still hurting, you got to do some different things to find the success you're going to find because you can't just get open, you don't have your full speed behind you. You know, maybe all of those all-pro and all those monikers they gave to Davante Adams are just not correct. So, you know, for when you said in your opening comment here, you know, hey, if you're going to be called a star by your quarterback, you have to do something. Maybe Davante Adams is doing something right now, and this is it. I mean, it's really hard to think that Davante Adams and Richard Rodgers peaked last year in the playoffs and this year have become much less than what we actually saw them do with the same quarterback throwing the ball, with the same offensive line blocking, with the same running backs, the same coaching staff, and pretty much the same offensive system. It's a little scary because now you need guys who are better X's and O's people than I am to go in and explain to me what's happening because, you know, I don't think it's just Davante Adams. Jeff Janis, you can't lean on the fact that you're a seventh-round pick and just say, well, I'm a seventh-round pick, so anything you get from me is gravy. I mean, we've said that before. I've said that before on the show because you can't expect to get a lot from your late-round draft picks. But, I mean, come on. You know, if Donald Driver isn't proof that if you do the right things and try and become a student of the game and engage yourself and put your heart into it, and that's not something you can teach Jeff Janis to do. I mean, he either loves football or he doesn't. And to me, the way that he's portrayed by the media and with some of you read between the lines and some of the comments that Aaron Rodgers has made about his route running, just seems to me like, doesn't it just seem to you kind of like Jeff Janis is like the class clown who just doesn't really seem to want to get his head in the game? And because if you're running a lazy route, this is not Saginaw State anymore. I mean, you were playing, you know, competition in college that, you know, probably some good high school teams could keep up with. So you could run a lazy route and still get open and use your speed and score 5 touchdowns a game and look like a star. But this is the NFL. I mean, and so if you're not motivated by what you've been able to do with your speed on the kick return game, because he's been great, and I think you ride the Jeff Janis train at kickoff even when Ty Montgomery comes back because, you know, it's the Randall Cobb returning punts argument of, hey, we need him as a receiver. Why put him at risk on special teams? Yeah, Montgomery has showed some potential, and he could break a long run, and maybe overall he's the better player. But, you know, go with the hot hand and save Montgomery for wide receiver because you asked if not Adams, you know, who do you replace him with? Well, that's obviously got to be Montgomery. I think Adams is, like it's been talked about this week, is going to get moved down the depth chart, and he's going to very quickly become the 4th guy on this receiving core when Montgomery finally does come back healthy, which I'm hoping is this week. So, you know, it's been too long. I mean, you know, this is the second year for both of these receivers, Adams and Janis. They should both be elevating and improving. If they're not, then now you have to consider the fact that maybe you've seen the best of what they have to offer, and the best we're going to get out of Davante Adams is inconsistent play, an occasional flash. Hopefully it happens at the perfect time. But the interception that Aaron Rodgers threw against the Bears, I have not watched the play over because I'm one of those that, you know, the game doesn't go well, I kind of burn the tape. I don't want to watch it again. But, you know, according to everything that I've heard, the route that was run by Adams was partially to blame for that interception because he didn't run through the route. And that's, you know, it doesn't get any more fundamental than finishing your plays. And so, no, don't scapegoat Adams. Montgomery probably replaces him. And, again, one of many issues that the offense is dealing with right now.
One of many, and, you know, a couple of things you brought up lead us to the next question, and that's, you know, are we dealing with players who, you know, when you kind of went on your explanations of Adams and Richard Rodgers and guys like that, are we dealing with players who just aren't as good as we thought, or is this just a slump? And my theory on it is Davante Adams is young. I still like his talent. I still think that he can improve, do some things that help this offense. Now, do I think he'll ever be a number 1 receiver? I don't. And I think even with the hype, you know, that I brought for him this offseason, I tried to make it clear that I didn't think he would be a good number 1 receiver. But, you know, a number 2 behind Jordy Nelson someone along those lines, that would be just fine for this offense. Now, his skills are magnified, or lack thereof are magnified, with the absence of Jordy Nelson, and now that he has to be the man, so to speak, and he's not being the man, that's an issue. The one thing that I do want to explain is the people that hyped up Richard Rodgers were the ones that I never understood, because for anyone that has listened to just about anything I've said, Richard Rodgers is a good role player. He's a number 2 tight end, you're fine. But to ask him with the Packers scheme to beat one-on-one man coverage or to really contribute anything big to a passing game outside of the red zone, you're asking too much of him. You know, and I understand that guys like Rob Gronkowski or Jimmy Graham or Jermichael Finley don't just fall off of trees. But the Packers have had now 2 full seasons to replace Jermichael Finley. They had Owen Daniels in their room. They told him no, or didn't sign him for whatever reason. He wasn't a Packer, and he should have been. This season, did very little, if anything, to address the tight end position. They were rolling with Richard Rodgers and Andrew Corliss. Even when Corliss comes back, he's kind of being painted as the guy that can add something to the tight end position, and I think he can, but Andrew Corliss really at his heart is just a guy, much like Richard Rodgers is just a guy. The Packers have to get somebody that can play a little ball at the tight end position and actually catch the football. You know, and I understand. You know, I'm not too upset with Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins, for example, because the Packers in the second round didn't have a chance to grab Max Williams or someone like that. The year before, when they did draft Richard Rodgers, you know, they wanted guys like Jason Morrow, Austin Sperry-Jenkins. Both guys were off the board before they selected Devontae Adams much later in that round. So they didn't have opportunities to get those guys. However, this is where the Ted Thompson frustration kind of comes in a little bit, because they have cap room to spend. And I'm not asking them to give somebody a Jimmy Graham contract, but to find someone that can actually contribute at the tight end spot for not a whole lot of money. I mean, even if it was Owen Daniels or you go as high as someone like Jordan Cameron, those guys weren't getting Jimmy Graham's contract. You know, those guys got modest contract. Cameron got a little bit more money. Obviously, Owen Daniels' contract was very modest in Baltimore and now in Denver. Those are moves that need to be made. And I think, you know, defensively, it's kind of hard to tell with some of these guys because I think the defense has played relatively well. Clinton Dix has stepped up, for example, since being called out after the Carolina game. He's played very well since then. Defensively, I think there's some things to work with. Offensively, I think there's some things to work with. More so, I guess my answer is this is just a weird year in the NFL where it seems like everything is working against the Packers, and age could be a factor as well. You know, Josh Sitton is looking like he's starting to show some age. He's gone from best guard in the NFL to very, very good. And that's not to slight Josh Sitton, but it's just very, very good, not all pro. David Bakhtiari has regressed, for example. Brian Bulaga has been banged up all season, and that's kind of what Brian Bulaga is anyways. You know, last year was really the first year that he was really healthy for just about the whole season. He missed the one game after a knee injury in Seattle. He came back the following week, and that was it for him. But otherwise, for the most part, he's been pretty banged up for the most of his career. So I think that there's no one easy answer here. I think that the Packers are using a lot of not special players and kind of trying to ask them to do special things. Richard Rodgers comes to mind. James Jones comes to mind. And Devontae Adams is starting to come to mind as well. Maybe he's not as good as we thought he was, but I think that he needs a little bit more time. I guess of all the guys that are getting blame, I think he's the one I'm going to cut the most slack, which is weird because he's been very bad. I will give you that. But I think with some patience, some development, over the rest of this year and next year, I think he can be better for it. He just has to prove that. And I may be wrong, and I'll be the first one to admit I'm wrong if that's the case. So I guess, Jason, to go back to the early question is, are these players just not as good, or is this a slump?
I still don't know if I have an answer for that. I just, you know, I go back to Adams and Richard Rodgers. Like, they did some really good things last year in big games. So what's what's going on now that they all of a sudden can't produce? I mean, was that little bit of film that they put out there for opposing defenses enough that the other, I mean, they've caught up and can now defend these guys very easily? Or was the presence of Jordy Nelson on the field enough to open up opportunities for these guys, and they capitalized on it because they had more room to work? You know, I think it's probably a little bit of everything, but if Jordy Nelson's going down has led to this much of a drop-off in the offense, and that really, truly, if somebody can show me and really, you know, kind of highlight the fact that that's really what it is, now you got to ask about the talent acquisition. Now you have to look to the talent acquisition side of things, which falls on Ted Thompson and the scouting team, which, you know, let's not kid ourselves. Three guys that were in this personnel group are all general managers for other NFL teams right now. So, I mean, you had some pretty high-powered brain trust going on in acquiring talent for the Packers for several years that have all been gone now for the past 2 or 3. And so are we seeing a little bit of a, I mean, talk about a slump. How about a slump in the scouting? Because who pulls the trigger on making the draft picks at the end of it all? It's Ted Thompson. He said so himself. He makes the pick, regardless of what everybody says. So when he chose Richard Rodgers in the 3rd round, maybe because the guy that was taken before him or ahead of him was somebody the Packers really thought they were going to have, and then they panicked. You know, I've heard that so many times, and I'm getting tired of it. You're a GM. This is your trade. This is your craft. You know, the Justin Harrell pick, panic because Marshawn Lynch got drafted. The Richard Rodgers and Kyrie Thornton picks, panic because so-and-so got drafted ahead of them. Like, come on, get it together. I mean, you gotta put the right talent on this team, and you know who you have. So is it time to start giving a little bit more heat to Ted Thompson? I'm not saying that, you know, he's failed. I mean, Dayton Jones is playing well. Nick Perry's starting to play well. Clinton Dix. So, you know, he's brought in some good players. But if you're going to do the draft and develop, then you better hit on the mid-rounds, and you better get guys that can contribute unrealistically, because we said, hey, Jake Ryan, let's temper our expectations here. Jake Ryan's a 4th-round pick. I expect him to be a contributor by the end of the season, but he's still a 4th-rounder. We can't expect a 4th-rounder. I mean, most on average can't expect that guy to be the linchpin of your team or, you know, come in and solve all the problems. Not that the defense has a ton of them. Again, it's more on the offensive side of the ball. But, you know, if you're going to do draft and develop, you're not going to bring in any free agents, then, you know, you better hit on these draft picks. And that's why I think it's too late this season. And I'm telling you, fans, listen, regardless of what I say is wrong with this team right now, the roster that you're looking at, these 53 guys and your practice squad, this is it. It's not changing. Nobody is coming in. Andre Rison is not walking through that door. That is not happening this season. Okay, so these are the guys that this team has to go with. But after this season, when it's over with, and at the pace that things are going right now, there's going to be a lot of discussion about what the Packers need to do next year. And we're getting very ahead of ourselves with this whole thing. But it's going to be very big. I think it's time for Ted Thompson, regardless of what his pattern has been, if they don't bring somebody in who's a veteran, because, again, if you're going to draft, 5th, 6th rounders at a position of need, where they need a guy, they get a tight end, but they don't draft a tight end until the 5th round, you need to bring in a free agent. You can't expect a 5th rounder to come in here and take care of it. You need to bring somebody in who can play this game, that knows this game in and out, whether it's a burner or not. If you get lucky and get an Owen Daniels who's 2 years older now, a Jermaine Gresham or whatever, insert free agent name. I think it's time. I'm finally on board that I think it might be time for them to look at bringing in guys with some experience, and you're going to have to kind of get over yourself with this draft and develop, because it works to an extent. I think we've seen the extent or the end of where it's at right now. But Jacob, I still don't have an answer for you. I hope it's a slump, because I've seen these players play better, and I'd like to think that we weren't all just fooled by what we saw at the end of last year.
Well, and I think one thing that you hit on there at the end is, you're talking about draft and develop, and to the extent, and that's when it is draft and develop only, and that's all you do is draft players and develop them, and that's fine, and I'm okay with that. However, you can look at, there's plenty of other teams that have other players in their room. A lot of people bring up how the Packers only have 3 players on their roster that have ever played for another team, and that's cool. That's a great story to have. However, some of those things aren't always a good thing. And you look at, like, the Baltimore Ravens are a team that's really looked at as a draft and develop team, but they go out and they traded for a Steve Smith who contributed very well for them until he was injured. Elvis Dumerville was brought in by them. They've got players. You got to kind of be willing to use free agency to kind of mask some of the bad picks that you've made. And everybody's going to miss. That's just how it works in the draft. You're going to miss on picks, but you can use second-tier free agents to kind of cover up the mistakes that you make. The Packers could have done that on several different occasions. With Owen Daniels comes to mind. There's other players, and now for every one player that we bring up, there are other players that the Packers have been connected to and passed on that have turned out okay. Steven Jackson comes to mind. So it's not just we're trying to explain. You could be starved for veteran presence, but going goofball for free agent frenzy is also not the way to do it. There's a happy medium. Again, Ted's not going to spend like the Washington Redskins, and he doesn't need to. And there's certain positions that he's just not going to spend on free agents at. Running back is one of those, unless it's on his terms, absolutely 100%. Steven Jackson is an example to that to a T. One thing I would like to see is, it seems like the Packers now are only really going after free agents that don't affect the compensation pick formula. And that's something I think they need to get away from a little bit as well. Get yourself, if the player's the right player, damn the compensation pick. Affect that a little bit. Go get the player if that's what necessary. But we will talk more and more about that as the off-season hits. One other thing you mentioned, we talked about putting pressure on the front office. The coaching staff's under fire as well. And my question is, what's your biggest concern with this coaching staff? And mine is very simple, and it's the same one it's been for a while. They're very stubborn. Loyal to a fault is another term that I've used for them. I love Mike McCarthy. I think that he's a very good coach. But there is some concern now. This is his 10th year here. I do have some concern that maybe his message is getting a little bit stale. And I do have some concern that he's going to be loyal to the rest of his coaching staff, and that Tom Clements has proven, at least by production, and I'm not saying it's all his fault, but by production, he's proven that maybe he's not the best offensive coordinator in the world, best offensive play caller in the world. Dom Capers, I've made my point on him several times. The Packers' defense, as much draft capital as they've spent on the defensive side of the ball, that should be a dominant unit, and it hasn't been. We're talking about last year's unit being one of the best defenses the Packers have had since 2010. And last year's defense was okay. It was pretty good, but it wasn't great. We're talking about that defense as if they were dominant and suffocating, and they just weren't. This year's defense, I guarantee you, when they face Carson Palmer and the Arizona Cardinals or anyone, the Packers' defense is the beneficiary of a lot of bad offenses. I think that's when they play well. The Bears' offense, nothing special. Lions' offense, nothing special. And you look at some of the games that they've played, the games that they've gotten lit up. Peyton Manning, veteran quarterback, they made him look like he was Peyton Manning in 2005, when he was an MVP and breaking records and all that stuff. Cam Newton, veteran quarterback, and if he could hit the broadside of a barn that day, accuracy-wise, they would have scored 50 points. There's other games that they've struggled this year, and that's frustrating. And my worry is that the coaching staff will remain pretty much intact from the season. And if the Packers, you mentioned, they've lost 4 out of 5 now. That's a stretch that the Packers haven't had with a healthy Aaron Rodgers in a long time, maybe ever. I don't have the 2008 schedule in front of me, but it's very possible they lost 4 or 5 that year. But other than that, the Packers have been very successful. If they finish this year, and currently the Vikings are beating the Atlanta Falcons, so if that is the case, if that remains the case, and it looks like the Vikings are going to win, it's 20-3. the Packers will be in second place again. And they were that last week, and they ended up beating Minnesota, and all was well, and hunky-dory, and Packerland again, and maybe we were prisoners of the moment last week as well. But the coaching staff, if the Packers, say, start 6-0 and finish 10-6, that means they went 4-6 down the stretch. If they finish 9-7, it's 3-7. You go down the line of what they could finish feasibly now from here on out. And if that's the case, if that's what happens, then something has to change. And I don't necessarily mean the head coach, but from a coaching staff standpoint, you really have to reevaluate what you're doing, how you're doing it. And I think that one thing that might start with is really, I mean, as much as I've talked about the defense, I think it starts on the offensive side of the ball. I think there needs to be some guys in there that maybe Mike McCarthy can be held accountable by. It's new voices, people that challenge him and say, hey, listen, we don't need to run 80% of our plays out of 11 personnel. We can run different formations. We can run different play styles. A lot of people, there are people now in the national media talking about how the Packers have, quote, the most randomized, Andy Benoit's the guy, quote, the most randomized passing attack in all of football. That's not something I want to hear for an offense led by Aaron Rodgers, led by this offensive mind that is Mike McCarthy, led by Tom Clements, who's supposed to be this top assistant that's gotten promoted every year so they could protect him from getting a head coaching job. This coaching staff is stubborn, and it needs to realize that some of the issues that they have, change them, and maybe that means changing coordinators on offense, changing coordinators on defense, and kind of getting a somewhat fresh start going into 2016, and get some of that formation diversity back that they had when McCarthy first started here. So a lot of concerns. The main one for me is stubborn and loyalty, which is a good quality to have as a man, but as a coach can be an issue. So, Jason, biggest issue with the coaching staff is what?
Well, I co-sign on most of what you said there. Obviously we would kind of echo each other there, but I'm going to go with something more on the 50,000-foot level, and that is that I alluded to it earlier. This team and organizations, whether you're talking about corporate America, the military, whatever, they take on the personality of their leader. And I have seen the Packers now. I've seen vines of the Packers coming out of the tunnel on 2 occasions this season for a game, and they look like they're walking to a funeral. Now, I understand that different types of personalities get motivated in different kinds of ways. It's a lot of fun to see the Ray Lewis types of the world. I'm sorry, Jacob, for using that example. Or, insert, Brett Favre, for example. We all love seeing that out there, and I get that some guys are just as motivated walking at a snail's pace because of the way that they motivate themselves. But I don't see Mike McCarthy getting this team up because they had everything to play for on Thursday night. Pride. You are at Lambeau Field. You just got embarrassed there by the Lions 2 weeks ago. Bart Starr is on the field. Brett Favre's number is going up in the ring. Brett Favre is one of the biggest reasons why this team is in the position that it's in today, which is a winning franchise, a team that is expected to win division titles, a team that players want to seemingly play for because Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. Teams that opposing teams don't want to play. That's why Brett Favre is getting honored. All of the ironies, all of the symbolisms, all of it was there for the taking. The Bears didn't play a great game. They scored 17 points. And 7 of those points came when they got the ball on a turnover by a running back who 2 years ago and even last year did not have a lot of problems putting the ball on the ground. This team is just not responding to its failures. And so I don't know what Mike McCarthy is saying to the team, but all we keep hearing in the press conferences and in the media are the same answers over and over and over again. Now, Jacob, you have been fortunate enough to actually have attended some press conferences and have actually been able to even throw some questions out there for these guys. So you know better than I do and everybody out there that a lot of times what you hear is coach speak, and they're just going to say general things that you could, copy and paste any other person to say when they basically don't want to answer the question, they don't want to give anything up, or they just hate talking to the media, which I think is part of what Mike McCarthy, kind of how he rolls. He just doesn't like the media very much. He doesn't like talking to the media. But that is the window into what's going on with this team. So when all the whispers start to happen, when the fans start to question what you're doing and how you're leading this team and what's going on at 1265 Lombardi in the locker room when we aren't, privy to what's happening and what's being said, you got to deal with it, because that's all you're giving us. And this is all that we see, is that this team is not responding. I mean, come on. Peyton Manning, the Broncos honor Pat Bowlen, and Peyton Manning looks like he's 21 years old again. And they're a good football team, and they took the Packers to task, gave them their first loss of the season. The Packers come back home 2 weeks later. Ron Wolf gets honored on the field, and they lay an egg against the Lions. Okay, embarrassing. Ron Wolf is there, guys. Hello. 2 weeks later, go beat the Vikings on the road. All right, I think we're okay. Blip on the radar. We're cool. Gonna boat race the Bears for sure. It's Packers weather. Bart Starr, Brett Favre on the field. Egg lay. I can't help but put it at the feet of Mike McCarthy and just say, hey, you know what? Get through this season. That's fine. I mean, realistically, Jacob, I look at the rest of the schedule. I'm not very confident in saying anything better than 9-7 right now. I don't see. I think a third victory with the schedule that they have left. I don't know where they're going to get it from. They're going to have to steal one from the Lions or at Oakland, because I think that they'll probably beat the Cowboys because Tony Romo is done and it's Matt Castle. I think they'll beat the Cowboys, and I think that they'll beat the Vikings in Week 17. But outside of that, I have no idea where they're going to get their third victory from. So, Mike McCarthy, you're up. I mean, I don't think it's time to make a coaching change, but if this team goes into the tank, and, we talked about this a couple days ago, they're not going to lose out. I don't see that happening. If they do, somehow, that's awful. And then Mike McCarthy is going to have a lot of questions to answer, and he's not going to be able to duck those questions. We talked about the coaching staff being stubborn, making adjustments in game. Let's talk about Mark Murphy. Okay? How long do you think it's going to take before Mark Murphy, who was in charge during the Brett Favre situation, and with all the things that he said and the way that he handles himself, I mean, he gets up on the microphone to introduce Brett Favre on Thursday night, and I was snoring through the whole thing. I mean, not that he's paid to be this great, dynamic speaker, but I don't know if he's necessarily going to be the one that's going to sharply make any kind of adjustments that need to be made if it in fact comes to that, which we're not there yet, but we could get there. So that's my biggest concern, is Mike McCarthy and the personality that this team has taken on under his leadership.
Well, Jason, one thing you mentioned about concern with Mike McCarthy, and you talked about how he mentions in his press conferences, John Rahor, my dude, that was kind of with PackersTalk.com when I started, John mentioned at the beginning of the season, he sent out two pictures. One was Mike McCarthy the day he got hired, and one was Mike McCarthy at that point. They look like two completely different people. Now, I know 9 years is quite some time. People are going to age in 9 years. But Mike McCarthy looks like this old, tired coach that just kind of lost some passion. Now, I'm not saying that is the case. That's just what it looks like. I mean, there's a lot of stress in this job, and understandably so. One other concern I have that you brought up, though, is, he's kind of snippy with the media. And he wasn't that way when he started. He wasn't. That's just not the case. Mike McCarthy, I met him in 2011 and talked to him for a very brief amount of time, but I was doing some media work at the time, and he was very nice to me. He could tell I was new and nervous, and, he basically kind of told me to relax and that kind of stuff, so that was very cool, and I'll always be appreciative of Mike McCarthy for that. However, snippy with the media, and he says the same things every week. And there was a coach in the area that I live in that used to get made fun of for that constantly by both Bears and Packers fans. And I've said this before. This season, Mike McCarthy sounds like Mark Trestman, and that is terrifying to think of because Mark Trestman got ran out of Chicago faster than he could say his own name. I'm not saying that's what should happen for him, but that's what it sounds like with trust the preparation. We're not that far away. We need to do this and that. Reality is they are far away from what they used to be. The Packers gave up 17 points to the Chicago Bears. If this was last year's team, for example, and they gave up 17 points to the Bears, I would have told you they won by 30 plus. And they did, usually, more often than not. Now, year to year, every team's different. I understand that. But, Mike, you sound like Mark, and that ain't good. Real quick, before we sign off, Packers-Lions Thursday night at Ford Field. The Packers lost to the Lions 18-16 not that long ago. Mason Crosby shanked a 52-yard field goal in one of the ugliest games at Lambeau Field that I've ever been in attendance for. This week, I'm back to my new, well, it's really your policy, Jason, but I'm adapting it for myself. I'm not picking the Packers until they show me that they can win consistently. So, they're on the road. It's a Thursday. They just laid an egg against the Chicago Bears. That's 2 consecutive eggs in 3 weeks against division opponents. And those were 2 games at home. This game's on the road. I know they just beat the Vikings on the road, but that was a atmosphere that was a little different. It was built up as a big game, and the Vikings looked like they weren't ready for the moment. Detroit's playing like they've got nothing to lose. I like the Lions 21-17 in this game. And really the frustrations just continue to mount. The offense struggles. The defense makes a couple plays, but really wilts late. 21-17 Lions is my pick. The Packers get swept by the Detroit Lions if my prediction holds true. Jason, you sticking with your own policy?
Well, okay, I'm not going to pick the Packers in this game, but this is not because of the policy. They lost couple games in a row. I mean, I'm having major brain farts today. I don't know what it is. I think I'm off schedule. But, the Packers had lost, 3 games in a row? So, at that point it was like, okay, forget this. Like, that's a trend here. They won 1 last week against the Vikings. They're capable of winning games. They're certainly capable of winning against the Lions, but I'm not going to pick them because they're on the road and they're playing a Lions team that, although their record is not great right now at 4-7, they've won 3 games in a row now and they've looked pretty good doing it. And although they have not played teams either that were good or that were not playing well, in the case of the Packers, they did what they needed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to beat teams that you're better than. And the Packers have not done that in 2 of the last 3 games. So I don't have a score for you, Jacob, because I don't even know where to go with this team and this offense because they're just so unpredictable. So I'm not even going to go with a score. I'm not going to do the 40-0 thing again like I did with the Vikings game. But I'm picking the Lions to win this one, and I have no idea which player on the Detroit roster is going to light the Packers up who has no business doing so. I got into a discussion with our counterpart, Ross Uglum, from the benches about whether or not the Packers have improved against tight ends, and his take was just overall in terms of yardage and not giving them their best game of the season when they've done better. And I guess if you look at the statistics that way, maybe that's the case. I think the Packers have still struggled to keep tight ends out of the end zone, albeit, whether it's from 1 yard or not. You mentioned Nate Palmer completely screwing the pooch on his coverage of Zach Miller, and we've seen some other tight ends do well. Brandon Pettigrew had a touchdown catch against the Packers. It's still his only touchdown catch of the season. And he hasn't caught a ball since that game. He's got 5 catches all year. So, hopefully it's not him. And I have no idea. I have no idea which Packers team is going to show up on Thursday, and it's a weird feeling. We talked about this on the phone the other day. Fans out there that have only been following the Packers for about the last 20 years or so, what you've seen over the last 5 games is a small window into what it was like to be a Packers fan in the 80s. This was what we dealt with. We dealt with a Packers team that we still sat in front of the TV and watched and hoped would win. We wore our jerseys, we got our beer and our chips and our popcorn and all of our whatever, and all of our friends together, and expected a big performance and rooted for the team and really wanted them to play well. And week after week, we just saw them fall short and short and short. So, and it's happening with a lot more talent than some of those teams in the 80s had, to where you could say, well, Randy Wright leading the team is not going to, is not going to light it up. Oh, Anthony Dillwag or Blair Keel are not going to tear it up. So I guess that's the problem. They just need a quarterback. But this is a little bit of a glimpse into what life was like. So again, be very thankful for the last couple decades that we've had, and hopefully, like we've talked about today, hopefully this is just a slump, and the Packers can turn it around. At this point right now, they're 1 game behind the Vikings. Minnesota's 8-3 now. They beat Atlanta today. Packers are 7-4. The Bears are 5-6. Don't count them out yet. They're playing very well, and Jay Cutler is not the same old Jay. So the NFC North is not a weak division anymore. It's going to be fun to see how this whole thing plays out. The Vikings have a tough couple games. I think they play Arizona. Yet the Packers have the Cardinals on the schedule. So who knows how this whole thing is going to turn out in the end. But this was a good discussion. But I'm hoping, Jacob, that next week we can just get back to kind of talking about a victory and celebrating a win, hopefully, for this Packers team. Because if they don't, not only have they lost again and they're sitting at 7-5, but now we got to wait a week and a half before the next game after that, because it's a Thursday night game. They don't play again until the following Sunday.
That would be correct. They would play the following Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys, and that'll be a home game. But first, it will be December 3rd, Thursday night, Ford Field. Also, if you have NFL Network, stick around after the game. Timeline, Favre returns will be on after that. So for those of you that are interested in that sort of programming, there's a Brett Favre documentary on following the Packers and Lions game. Jason and I both like the Lions this week, and with that, we're gonna end today's show. Be sure to check out PackersTalk.com for all your latest Packers news and podcasts. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pulse of the Pack. You can follow me personally at Jacob Westarp. You can follow Jason at Jason Perrone. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors. No play of the week or game ball this week, I think, because of the mounting frustration and things of that nature. But thank you to Mayfield and Waukesha Sports. We appreciate all that you guys do. Check out our show, Pulse of the Pack, on iTunes. Subscribe to that. Give us a positive rating or a negative rating. Actually, no, just positive ratings. No negativity allowed around here. And I'm joking, of course. But check out iTunes. Give us a subscription there. Help us out. Send us questions and such on Twitter. What do you guys want to hear about? What do you think's wrong with the Packers? Things of that nature. Tag both of us in it. We'll be able to answer you guys maybe on the air, maybe right there on Twitter. But Packers-Lions, December 3rd, Ford Field. Should be a fun night. Thanks, as always, for listening, and go Pack Go.
Of the Pack Podcast. Eddie Lacy, Mike Daniels, Gilbert Brown, Don Barclay, Micah Hyde, your Green Bay Packers, yesterday's legends and today's superstars. From corporate or nonprofit events to private parties, add some spice. Hire a Packers player from Mayfield Sports Marketing. For details, just go to PackersTalk.com and click on Player Appearances.
Are you looking for some signed Packer memorabilia?
Look no further than Waukesha Sports Cards.
If the Green Bay Packer can sign it, Waukesha Sports Cards has it.
Check our website for upcoming Packer player and legend signings.
Go to WaukeshaSportsCards.com.